I'm Aryeh Schwartz,
And I'm Rachel Galligan.
and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. This offseason has hit the ground running. Head coaches have been announced left and right, and one of the latest ones is Christie Sides as the new head coach of the Indiana Fever. We're here to break it down and discuss. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. Welcome back to the Winsidr show. Big news, Indiana Fever have a new head coach. They have been a team that's been, to put it nicely, on the bottom of the league for a few years now. Recently have just been a perennial lottery team. Still have not gotten that first pick. Fingers are crossed that in a few days they'll be able to announce that they'll be getting the first pick. With the lottery is on Friday at 5:30. Rachel, Christie Sides. Before we get into reactions, just real quick, she's been around for a long time, over 20 years of experience. This is her first real shot as a head coach. She's been with Pokey Chapman for a very, very long time. Was with Pokey in Chicago when they built that team up and went to the WNBA finals. I believe it was 2014. She was with Pokey in Indiana. And maybe one of the more impressive, important aspects that I feel like isn't getting enough attention is she also worked with Pokey when Pokey was the head coach of the powerhouse Russian team Spartak back in the day with Sue Bird, Lauren Jackson, Diana Taurasi, and like all of these ridiculous, amazing players that just destroyed and dominated the overseas world. Rachel, thoughts on Sides? Maybe a name that most fans didn't know of, didn't think of, didn't hear of. And I should say she was an assistant coach for Atlanta last year.
Yeah, I mean, I it's funny to me, excuse me, being in this space and being a former coach myself and being involved in that side of it blows my mind when, one of the most experienced resumes that was probably on the board this year, and then people, don't quite maybe not the name doesn't necessarily resonate with them or isn't super familiar. It blows my mind because when I think of Christy Sides, I think of someone who's extremely experienced in the game. She has coached, like you said, all levels, got her start actually at the high school level, I believe, and then has had a vast amount of experience at the Division 1 level all the way up into the Big Ten. I definitely think that she's put in her time. And you look back, and as you talked about, I think one of the most intriguing aspects of it, we got to get her on the show and talk about that period of time in with Spartak, because that's going to be a really cool story that I think has not been told quite a bit. So that's going to be my new goal, is trying to get coach on the pod. But I mean, obviously had a great run in Chicago. That was a great stretch. Being able to watch Sylvia Fowles, Elena Deladon, Cappy Pondexter. I mean, that was such a great run to witness just myself. And then, obviously, Indiana Fever was a little bit more of a brief stint, but still showed promise of some things being built and put into place there. I still kind of wonder what could have happened had her and Pokey had, a little bit more time there with the Fever. But I think this is a great hire. I think that Christy Sides has put in her time. She's got an impressive resume as an assistant coach across all levels of the game. So you can't deny the experience there. You can't deny a lot of the different great basketball minds she has worked with, a lot of the great basketball players she has helped develop. She has historically been known as, a high energy players coach, has always built really meaningful, deep relationships with her players. She seems to be completely adored across the board. I think that this is a really good fit for the Fever, being able to bring in, someone who understands the league, who understands this generation of player from the collegiate level, because obviously we talk about this Fever roster and how young they're just recently removed, a lot of them, from collegiate basketball. And so now you're bringing in a coach that is very well versed in both avenues, whether that is the WNBA and whether that, and especially with the Fever. I mean, let's not forget second stint in Indiana. She knows the franchise. She has witnessed this franchise have success. Knows the standard of excellence there. So I think it's a great fit across the board. I'm excited. I'm excited to see a coach who has really just gone through the ranks and built up her resume and understands what it means to be in this league, what it means to be in that chair as an assistant, to helping out in many different ways. It's her time, and I think it's a really good fit for the Fever and this young roster. Um, I'm thrilled for him, to be honest.
It's interesting, and I think you touched on a lot of stuff that we could, go on for hours about. Not specific to her, but just as a general thing. But I really like what you said. Like, she's put in her work through all the stages. Now, you know me, I love to play devil's advocate. I'll flip it on its head and I'll say, look, she's never been a head coach before. This is a questionable call of hiring her. But I'll argue with myself and say, look, at what point, you know what I mean? Like, this Indiana Fever team has tried multiple varieties of different avenues of coaches. And at a certain point, you kind of need to roll the dice, put your faith in somebody, and hope that it works out properly.
Well, I
Now,
mean,
I
you
can
could say the same thing about Noel Quinn. I mean, we could go down
true.
the line and different, avenues in which these coaches get into that chair. There's not really a precedent there when it comes to the WNBA, at least right now. For me, I'm always going to be one of those people that respects just the grind and the time put in, and whether you get that first head job at the collegiate level, whatever that might look like, or whether that first job comes in the WNBA ranks, like when you've put in that work and you understand it as an assistant, like that time's got to come eventually. Someone's got to be willing to take that leap, and I respect Lynn Dunn for doing it.
100%. And I agree with that, right? Like, at a certain point, right? Like, you're I and I think I've seen some stats that have been put out, or some people have kind of passed my way of new coaches historically, like new coaches who haven't been head coaches before, historically, in their first year, and over the next 5 years, have a better record in the NBA and WNBA than, let's say, recycled coaches.
Interesting.
We've seen it happen before, where, the Dallas Wings brought in a Brian Agler, somebody who has been known for taking a a stagnant team, and putting them over the top, getting them to that next level. And I think at a certain point, it's kind of just like, okay, you have to, we don't know what happened in those interviews, what her game plan, what her style is that she wants. And I've been asking around the league, and I'll be completely blunt, a lot of people, I'm like, oh, is she defensive minded, offensive minded, like, what's her bread and butter? And everyone kind of says the same thing, which is, she's been around for so long. She's been in charge of the offensive game plan. She's been in charge of the defensive game plan. She's done it all. And to try and box her in to a certain coaching style, I think, based on what I'm hearing, would be unfair to her, which I agree with. Just because we haven't seen her as a head coach, we don't know what she's going to try and do with this roster. And real quick, let's run down this roster. A roster that, a few years ago, Rachel and I and many other talking heads were just ripping apart some of the contracts that they gave. Now, looking at this roster, it's not that horrible. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm always going to shake my head at the D-Rob contract of giving her 155 for multiple years. She's still protected, secured for this season. But you got Kelsey Mitchell and D-Rob, both protected contracts, both signed on. You got Emily Angsler and Alyssa Smith, Lexi Hall, Queen Egbo, Destiny Henderson. All those players are all on contract right now. Okay. Now, you talk about some other players. Got Tiffany Mitchell, complete free agent. Victoria Vivian's restricted. Emma Cannon restricted. Um, a few other people. I'm not gonna, we're not gonna do like a whole breakdown of who's a reserve and whatnot, but it gives you an idea of, while this roster has a lot of young players, a lot of young pieces, they do have cap space to make a few moves, bring in a few people, and complete it. It's more about, what are we going to like? What do you want to get out of Kelsey Mitchell? And who do you see building around, who would complement Angsler, Smith, and Destiny Henderson? And honestly, all these youngins, Queen Egbo too. So I'm excited kind of to see, like, okay, where's the direction? You have wiggle room with this roster, which is something we haven't really been able to say over the past few years. You're going to get a top 4 pick. you are in a situation where you should propel yourself at very worst case outside of the worst place in this league,
For
right?
sure. For sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean that's kind of where my head's at. It's very much a question of, oh, what are we going to see from her? What kind of coaching and GM positions, right? Like I almost for the near future, all we're really going to base this hire on is seeing what type of players they're bringing in free agency in the draft, because as of now we don't know what type of team, right? Like this team could very easily go towards they're going to be offensive minded, we're going to be defensive minded.
Yeah.
They have a little bit of both. The question is kind of which direction they're going in.
Well, and I think too, I mean, so much hinges on this draft. Everything you're saying, I completely agree with. I think it's really interesting. Like was it 2 years ago, year and a half ago? I can't even remember. I mean, this was a complete dumpster fire of a situation. And here we are today on November 9th or whatever day it is. And it's like, okay, I'm looking at this Fever franchise and I'm looking at the moves that have been done by Lynn Dunn, and I am looking at the new hire, and you look at the talent on this roster, and like you get the sense that it's like a really solid clean slate. It's no longer a dumpster fire that needs to be completely resurrected from the ashes. Now you're at a point where it's like, okay, this franchise clearly has been really, really bad and really, really struggled for recent years. But promising rookies, picks, new coach. Lynn Dunn is making moves. She's cleaning house. She's getting things done that need to be done there, and it feels like, okay, that now I feel like we're entering in a new era of the Indiana Fever franchise, and you're doing it with talented players. Then you're even going to get what in this free agency, in this draft, you're going to add even bigger assets to this team. And I'm just excited to kind of see what can be done there. Like you said, the X's and O's, the defensive aspect of it, we can talk about what we anticipate. We can have coach on and kind of ask those questions, but that's not going to be known until that ball is tipped up in the air. So right now, it's just a matter of analyzing the moves being made, and kind of what the trajectory of this team can be, and like we said, getting them off of those kind of just that how atrocious it was. I just feel hope for the franchise, that has been so painful to witness. And I think we saw a team last year that they were competing night in and night out. They were competing. They made games interesting. No, they didn't win a lot. Honestly, I thought their record was not a good indication of the amount of talent they had on this team. But a ton of rookies with a ton of experience that's going to transfer exceptionally well into year two is huge building blocks as well. So, I mean, like you said, this is a big free agency. Can they attract top free agent talent? What moves are made? Can they possibly get that number one pick? I mean, if we're talking about Aaliyah Boston going to Indiana, my God, that's a hell of a shot in the arm and cornerstone to build your franchise around as well. So, knock on wood for the Fever on Friday, I guess. That's a big night for them.
Oh, it's a huge night. And I would even like the difference for me is we've had points, and disagree with me if you want, Rachel. We've had points over the past, let's say, 5 years, since we've been hanging, chatting, where we've kind of had this feeling of things are getting in the right direction. Yes, it's been a dumpster fire throughout. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, Rachel. But there's been times where you've sat there, you go, okay, and maybe I'm thinking of the Pokey year, maybe I'm thinking of just overall. There's been times where you sit there and you're going, oh, they might be heading in the right direction. They might be making proper positive moves, and then there's just head scratchers. Um, Gondrzik, McCowan, the Jantel Lavender / D Rob signings. Like there's been times where we've seen them, we think we're going in the right direction, and then they kind of trip over themselves. So I'm excited to see
Yeah,
kind of what you were talking about. We won't know anything to the ball tips, but I'm excited to see the moments leading up to the ball tip where we can kind of get an idea of, okay, where do they feel? Because while and this is not to have a whole discussion on, but like while I completely agree, if you get number one, you're going to Leah Boston, no question. It does bring some questions on some other people on this roster, then, right? Of
for
the
sure.
Queen Egbos, the Melissa Smith, the Emily Angsler, like not in a question because no one's denying Boston has stardom and is a top talent, right? But in the sense of what do you do now when you are just kind of stacked in the bigs and you continue to accrue talent in there when you only have 12 roster spots type situation, right? Um,
Well,
and
we'll, we'll, we'll learn
that's the
about that
interesting
when
part.
that time comes. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's Indiana Fever. They probably won't get. They don't have the luck to get the number one
Well,
pick. I say that now because I didn't win the Powerball this past week. So
well, I mean, here, if you're the Fever, you're happy with one or two. I mean, that's that, and I would say their odds of securing at least one of those. I mean, for the love of God, well, let's hope. But I guess we'll find out in a few days.
we will, and we'll definitely. We have some really cool, interesting articles, and I'm sure you're going to be excited to read. We got a mock draft coming out same day or next morning as the announcement will come for the order after the draft lottery is announced on Friday, and then also we got a list of just some players who we think should be on your eyes keeping up, but don't worry about that. We appreciate you and thank you for listening. We'll be back. Tons of new content coming up on winsidr.com, tons of new podcasts coming on, and we got a few special guests coming. Don't worry.